Hi guys, I'm Deanna Joe and welcome to my channel, Responsible Faith. Today I have two very special guests with me. They have served in ministry in the United Pentecostal Church as missionaries to Papua New Guinea for 10 years and then in Norway for 2 years. They've served on staff at Christian Life College in California, and they've also pastored for a number of years. And so they ended up leaving the United Pentecostal Church, and they're going to share with us today what led to that decision and what that journey looked like for them and update us on what they're doing now. So welcome, Brian and Esther.
Hi, it's good to see everybody.
So I guess the best place to start is at the very beginning and ask you guys, how did you come to faith in Christ? And of course, why the UPC?
Okay, two different stories, probably.
Yeah.
Opposite stories, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I was born into it, several generations on both sides of my family. I went to my first camp meeting. I think my mom said I was 3 weeks old. Yeah. So it's all I've ever known. I was just raised in it. So I didn't really have a choice, So.
I was just young in the military. I was hungry for something deeper, something more. And I was in a little base in California in the Army. And I met a guy, he was a Baptist guy that was inviting me to a Bible study. And I was just hungry for a deeper walk with God. I was hungry for God. And I went to this Bible study, and that's when I first learned about the Acts 2:38 message and all of that. And I was all in, and that shaped all of my formative years. Now, I didn't have the greatest childhood growing up. Love my parents, but my childhood was troubled. So I was hungry and searching for something deeper. At the base that I was in, that little Bible study group was the only one there. A great, Pastor Bodie was the one teaching that Bible study. And I came in 1984. And then while I was in the military, and when I got out of the military in 87, I went to Bible college where I met her. And by that time I was already, pretty set. I was going to be in ministry. I was going to change the world. I was going to be the next apostle. I mean, I kind of drank the Kool-Aid, by the gallon, and I was all in for everything. And concerns or cautions that I had about different things that kind of didn't add up. What's the truth? It's what God showed me. So I just kind of pushed that aside for, until I couldn't anymore, basically. So we met in Bible college. That's how it started. We met.
So what prompted you to go to Bible college? Just the natural progression of being born and raised UPC? Esther?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
My two, I'm the youngest of four children. My two oldest went to ABI. And there was then the option of Gateway or ABI because I was born and raised in north central Iowa. So 6 of one, half dozen of the other, either Minnesota or Missouri. Same distance apart, really. One's north, one's south. But I wanted to go to California. I wanted to spread my wings, get some independence, get as far away from home as I could. And California was, of course, back then it was the quintessential getaway spot for, people to go and lots to do. And I wanted to see the world, and I just had itchy feet. And I wanted to just go to California, despite several cautionary tales and arguments from my parents. They tried to talk me out of it, but at the end, they went ahead and let me go,
They wanted you to stay closer to home?
Yeah.
But it was the late 80s, so Stockton Bible College was kind of a flavor
They
of the
were
month
hopping
back
at the
then.
time. Yeah.
They had a robust sign language program, which intrigued Esther with her passion.
That was one of the main reasons, yeah.
So, and I just wanted to, I was at a conference in 84 at Anaheim General Conference, and I heard a young guy talking about a Bible college in Stockton. And I thought, that's the school that I'm going to. I had no idea where Stockton was. But once I learned that was CLC in Stockton, California, that's what said it. Once I got out of the military, I was going to go to the Bible school in Stockton.
Okay. So just to back it up just a hair, what was it like in the UPC for you? Like, Brian, you mentioned that, there were certain things that maybe didn't add up for you and you had some questions, but I guess I'm thinking it must have been quite a change coming into the UPC from just not being UPC, I guess. I mean, there's a lot of rules and the control issue is there. How did that affect you?
Well, the church that I was baptized in was pastored by Henry Moore. Pastor Bodie was my initial pastor. And then when I went to my Fort Lewis for my permanent assignment in the Army, the church I went to was in Tacoma with Frank LaCrosse. Frank LaCrosse was not your typical UPC pastor. He didn't cram things down people's throat. He wasn't pushy. He was just a classical pastor in the sense that he just loved and shepherded people and not tried to control people. So I would visit other churches. I went to one, it was a kind of, I would call them radical holiness. My pastor called them radicals, okay? And they talk about if you rings are gonna, they went all down the holiness clothesline stuff. And I went there, and it was a marked difference in the spirit, the atmosphere of the church that, because back in the mid to early 80s, there were still pretty much, it's not so unilateral now. It's not so top-down control as it is now. Now it's just, everything is narrative-driven, agenda-driven. There it wasn't. In the UPC's history, they still had two different schools of thought that led to the merger in 1945.
Right.
And, by 92, that the centers of that were pretty much driven out.
Yes.
And I was aware of that. I was aware of the merger because I said, this was my thing. I wanted to learn everything I could about it. So I learned about the merger, studied missionary, just studied everything I could. And my thought was, because my background wasn't the legalistic aspects of it, that maybe I could be a change agent. But I saw the ties changing from a more church-centered issue, a pastoral support thing for elected leaders of the UPC, to more top-down control-driven, which right now it's top-down control. The only time they give you any sense of liberty or freedom is if your church is small enough to not be a threat to them or something they can manage, But once you get a, quote, big church, now the UPC would look at a big church as 100 or more, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the rest of the world, that's
not very big.
Right. But if you have that, I mean, a mega church is like 400 to 500 in the UPC guidelines. Because as a missionary, our average of church attendance was like 25.
Yeah.
So
when we were on deputation.
So we spoke in over
all churches everywhere. That's all we went to.
And we spoke in over 1,000 churches, so we would have broad knowledge of the length and breadth of that. Now, I met a lot of good pastors too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't all bad experiences. They were great experiences.
Yeah.
Men that loved God, their heart was in the right place. And typically, again, smaller churches, they're less prone to be political, and they're less prone to be subject to the controlling nature of the higher ups. So that was our experience. We actually loved the smaller startup churches, home missions churches. So I was aware of those differences, but my background, and I believe Esther's can say the same thing with her church growing up, we were not in that whole political thing. I did want to be a change agent because I wanted to love people, serve people, and help people. And I wanted God to be the one that would be the ultimate change agent in a person's life, not me, right? So, and that's kind of antithetical to most, again, sorry, but most UPC churches. They want to control people, regulate behavior, and stuff like that.
And especially now, I mean, a lot has changed since the early 90s.
Right.
We lost all of our moderates as well up here in this district. Really, the ones who were kind of at the forefront of our district at the time ended up all leaving. And so what was left, they were happy to take over.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And because nobody had the courage to stand up to it when it was happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Again, they were silence is deadly to any sort of religious movement, political movement, people movement of any kind.
Yeah.
And I'd like to say too is when that happens, your hypocrites because they're the silent, I would say, majority, but they're silent and they feel stuck and they feel trapped in an organization that's full of control. Their rules and regulations from the top down is nothing but control. And so you've got these silent partners in the UPC that are feeling stuck and trapped. And when they finally leave, it leaves a vacuum.
Yes.
And it's like, you know, the control mongers take over and they fill that vacuum space that is now unoccupied. And we see that happening all over.
And
yeah,
then,
it never leads to improvement, does it?
No,
right. And
no.
then to save face, what they do is belittle those that
They're
leave.
left. Yeah.
They don't ascertain why. I read a book, I forget the author, called Why They Left. Because as a pastor in Wisconsin, I was concerned about younger people. I had the same question. Why are so many people leaving, right? Why are we not retaining them? You know, you might could excuse one person for leaving. Oh, they went off the deep end. But when you have hundreds and thousands of people, when you look at the size of general conferences, that they used to fill arenas and now they partition off.
Yeah.
But yet, because the narrative is so set, rather than embracing some of their ideologies that may not actually be scripturally based, then they have to form a narrative, well, they left because of X, Y, Z. And then people that are contemplating leaving, then they become guilt bombed, shamed, right? Guilt shamed into, there must be something wrong with me. And then the fake threats, your life will be destroyed if you leave.
Oh yeah.
You'll have no future if you leave. I bought it hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, we did too for a while. Yeah.
When we left, we were kind of forced out because of circumstances we may get into later.
Yeah.
But I was 2 years in bed with depression, clinical depression.
Yeah, severe depression.
Because my identity was wrapped up in who I was for the UPC, not who I was in Christ.
Right.
Right.
And for a while, even
Threw
that.
him for a loop.
Yeah, 2 years I didn't get out of bed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and nobody called me to inquire about my well-being. Nobody.
Not one person.
You know, and it's cool. I'm not. This is no sour grapes here.
No.
I'm,
It's just fact.
But because any inquiries would be how it would make them look.
Right.
You know, how it would make them look.
If they really wanted to know the truth and really concerned about us or him in particular, I mean, he was the licensed minister. I was his tag along, his support. And so, but at the same time, if they'd really been concerned and they asked those questions, they would have gotten honest answers, and they didn't want to hear them.
Well, that's why they didn't ask, because they were afraid of honest answers.
Yeah.
But I did write letters.
They're terrified of it.
A former superintendent in Connecticut. I wrote to the general superintendent of UPCI. I wrote to the district superintendent of, and it's okay. It's fair game, right? The Iowa district superintendent, the Wisconsin district superintendent. I did write them explaining, and people that were in the knew that we just lost our church because of a coup d'etat. And I thought, as a licensed minister, I was a big fan of affiliation. Our church was affiliated, and I thought that being licensed protected ministers from having their churches overthrown
or stolen
because a district superintendent wanted to oust that pastor to install his son-in-law. Okay, so and when I would write letters, here's what's going on. People knew people that knew what happened in that whole thing that eventually led to our exodus, right? There's people that knew, even up to David Bernard himself, but none of them had the moral courage to stand up to, the foreign missions director, Bruce Howell. And I don't care, I'll name names because I preached for every one of them. Okay, I've been there for every one of them.
They all know us.
But nobody had the moral courage to say, wait a minute, stop. The Henryville missionaries for 12 years, they started 100 churches in Papua New Guinea in a 10-year period. They were field directors. They've proven themselves in ministry. And I was of the viewpoint that let another man's lips defend you. Either God will defend me or somebody will come to our defense. And that was our reality.
Yeah.
They didn't. People that had the power
to do so. They were like, they hid in the corner. Their were like,
option was,
we don't want anything to do with this. When they had the power to help, and they didn't.
Was cowardice. So
total cowardice.
Probably in about 2012 is when we resigned the church. It was a coup d'etat. Is all it was.
Yeah.
Slanderous, libelous. It was the whole movement that we're seeing today in the country. People get shamed, they get cancel culture. It was the very same cancel culture that happened there. A narrative gets formed that has no basis of truth, but there's an end objective to destroy a young couple, to remove them so someone else can take a church.
Yeah, exactly what happened. And I think what threw us for the loop, what set us back and made us hit rock bottom, was, I don't know, not necessarily the fact that some of the members of the church tried to oust us, but it was the fact that the people that were in leadership over us, because we held license with the UPC, we were ordained ministers in the UPC with long standing and good, standing. The fact that they are the ones that were behind it and pulled the rug out from under us with absolutely no basis or foundation for blame. Yeah. And so I think that's what threw us for the loop. Not that, church humans are humans. They're going to do stupid stuff. And, you might have a little uprising in your church and whatever, and you try to, talk it down and you try to work it out and everything. But when you've got church leadership backing those people up, shadow government coming in, having breakfast with your assistant pastor every single week for months on end before, and
who shares grandkids.
They share grandkids
with that guy, and who's the district superintendent
he's
of
the
that state.
District superintendent of that state.
The deck is pretty well much stacked.
It was stacked against us. We had, talk about standing on a rug and whoop, there we go.
Yeah,
nobody helped us. So
the UPC is full of nepotism, and it is full of politics. And the big thing is the movement of the Spirit, and God speaks, and God opens doors, and he closes doors. And for anybody who's been involved, you realize people open doors and the people close the doors. And sometimes you wonder, where in the world is God in any of this?
Right. And
yeah, that's true.
I think the other thing is the psychological ramifications. I love the movement of the Spirit when it's genuine. We felt it in our lives in the years that we've been out.
Oh my goodness.
Okay?
Yeah. Sweet and deep, much more than I felt in the UPC.
But never using a, quote, move of the Spirit to control or manipulate others that would surrender their will and their autonomy, their God-given autonomy and free will, to some, pseudo spiritual figure that would use that right in that position to power, manipulate, and control people.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the greatest blasphemy comes from a lot of churches, not just the UPC, when people abuse their power to obstruct individual rights of people to seek out what God wants for their life, not for my gain as a pastor, but for their gain as an individual who's doing their best to pursue God. Now, God may be leading that person into a direction away from me. I'm not going to say, well, God's saying you should stay here and, cut my grass every day. Seriously.
That happens, though.
It happens all the time. And then people feel conflicted about what's the loss. If I were to make the choice, the decision to leave, because when people know this is a bill of goods and it's not, there's great truths that I still believe that are in the UPC, but I think the leaven has now overwhelmed the lump. Okay, personally, the leaven has overwhelmed the loaf, and the cost of leaving, I won't minimize it. It's great. I'm thankful that we've left. I'm thankful for the 2 years that I spent in, probably clinical depression. Took us about 5 years to get reestablished, and until just about a year ago, we're finally, I would say, healthy. When we resigned our church, because we knew the superintendent wanted that church for his son-in-law. Ironically, we got a call from a missionary friend about going to Samoa to take over the Bible school there. I thought, these people that did this coup d'etat, the greatest thing they could do for us is throw us a bone, get us out of the country, let us do a thing.
And leave them alone so we wouldn't expose them.
But what they did is they wrote us a letter that said, you need to sit under a pastor for a year to learn what it's like to be a God-called minister and to learn servant leadership. So here we were ordained for over 20 years, 25 years in that movement. And they write to us, and then they said, if you leave this district, this letter will follow you everywhere you go. You talk about the ultimate of bullying, intimidation. So they not only blocked our
They wouldn't
efforts
even
to
look
get
at our
back,
application. They
efforts
wouldn't
to
even
get back.
process our
Yeah.
application.
Not only did they
Permissions.
block our efforts, and of course, Bruce Howell, the former mission director, because they're all political,
Stood with.
they did absolutely nothing. Some of
Yeah.
the worst cowards that walk earth, to me. I'm sorry. That's not sour grapes. That's just honest to God reality. Because if you don't have the moral courage to stand up for one of the least of these, and you're in the ministry, please do God a favor and just leave, right?
Yeah.
Don't, if you're going to control people and manipulate people that Christ died for, do yourself a favor and rediscover who you are.
Yeah.
That's my 2 bits to anybody that could get a benefit from that.
So what was the reason they gave for why they thought you should have to sit under a pastor for a year?
Okay, the district blocked our application even from going to the Foreign Missions Board, right? So they didn't even let it get to that point, right? And the Foreign Missions won't endorse somebody without a district's endorsement, even though
because we're ordained. So we had to have the district's permission for headquarters to process going back into missions.
Even though we've been with them for 12 years. Go figure, right?
Yeah, they said, no, we can't because, the Wisconsin district said no, and so we're not going to help you.
Every
they
time,
could have overridden it, but they didn't.
Yeah, but every time we would try to defend ourselves for these baseless and vile allegations against us, allegations that here's some of them: lack of love and care by head pastor.
Yeah, that was one.
Financial
malfeasance.
Financial malfeasance, which is ironically because we had a CPA that did our books. I never even looked at the offerings. I never even signed a check. I didn't have. I had the least to do with finances of anybody. I would never have my wife sign a check. We were as hands off as a human being pastor can be on the financial aspects of that church.
I mean, he saw the reports every week and whatever, but he didn't touch the books.
It was
the CPA did that for us, but he was accused of financial malfeasance.
It was a basis of slander. And
there was like 10 of them.
And it was kind of like, let's throw stuff up to see what will stick.
None of it's stuck.
And then if I try to defend myself, oh, you're being defiant. Oh,
yeah, you're just being defensive.
Yes.
You're being defensive. Well, you attack somebody and they put their hands up.
Yeah.
You're being defensive. Put your hands down. I want to punch you in the face.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
See, and I never thought.
We never expected it from men of God.
Yeah.
We never expected it. So it was so unexpected.
Yeah. And I thought, for example, for sure, if I just resign and give them what they want, because I mean, another thing too, we won a vote of confidence. They forced a vote of confidence that we won. And then according to the bylaws, I can change the board, and I got rid of the political board members. So when he didn't get his way, the superintendent, half the people after that broke my heart. I was done at that point. I mean, I was literally destroyed at that point. So then I figured I'll give him everything he wants so we can have peace. I will resign. And it was so crazy how the call came from Benny Blunt. He was a missionary to Samoas. And said, Brian, I've been thinking about you for the last couple months. And what do you think about coming back to the mission field? It was like, wow to me.
Total open door. We were like, this is where God wants us back on the mission field. There's no getting around it.
That's what I do.
We were missing it,
So,
we really wanted to go back.
So it was so crazy because I figured you give but the thing is, you give a terrorist everything they want, they're going to want more.
They're going to want more.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That's another thing I would like to encourage people that are thinking about leaving or people that are on the fence. You don't have to go out bitter or angry or hostile, but don't compromise what you're feeling.
No.
Don't minimize what you're feeling. Don't allow false guilt to try to control you or manipulate you. Because we gave them everything what they want, but what they wanted was our destruction.
They wanted everything. They wanted to destroy us. And as far as the UPC was concerned, they think, the Henrys are washed up. They've left. We were successful. We destroyed them. Their ministry, we took everything from them. And yeah, they did, because our entire livelihood, our
identity at the time,
our sense of identity was totally stripped away from us. and we were left laying naked in the gutter on
Yeah.
the street. When we lost the church, it's funny because I was working as the head sign language interpreter for the school district of Monroe. And I was traveling between everything from pre-K to advanced placement high school classes and working with these deaf kids in the school district. That was my job. And I was contracted with them. Well, there came a vote in the city that year, a referendum for financial aid for the school. And the city did not pass it. The voters said, no, we're not going to give more taxes for more money. So then they told me, well, this is your last school year. We can't afford you. And you're done after this year. So they laid me off. That was in June. And then all hell broke loose, blah, 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 blah. August, September, October, November, December is when this whole coup came up. And I mean, we've never been so terrified of certified letters. They would send certified letters to our home and make us sign them and all that stuff, you know, it was just a mess. And so 6 months later, he was ousted as pastor of the church, or resigned, I should say, whatever. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It was kind of it was a mutual breakup, I guess. So here we had both lost our jobs. We had a home, we had a car payment. You know, we were just living life back in the United States after being missionaries. And we ended up losing our home. We ended up losing our cars. We ended up losing our entire livelihood, our jobs, our friends, everything. And we ended up homeless for 2 years. We lived in the attic of my parents' house in Iowa for 2 years while we just tried to stay alive. You know?
And did anybody reach out to you in this time?
Nope.
Well, actually, one guy.
Oh, one person? Who?
One guy.
I can't remember.
Okay, this guy used to pass. He left the UPC years ago. Remember? I forget his name. He used to sell flowers by the road in Puyallup.
Yes. Sweet, precious man. We're still connected on Facebook today.
But I forget his name. I'm sorry. But even if
I know it is, but we won't say it.
But he left. He had a situation like 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, where he had pastored a church of over 1,000, and in a minute it was all gone from him in Puyallup area.
Yeah.
And I was a young Bible school kid. I'd see him selling flowers by the road, and I was
You're
cocky
like,
and arrogant and stupid. I'm
Look
like,
how
oh.
the mighty have fallen. I mean, we were so judgy.
Well, he called me. He called me.
He was the one that called us. Yeah.
And he said, Brian, I've understood you've gone through some rough times. This is so-and-so. And I remembered his name.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, how did he get my number? He said, listen, you're in Cedar Rapids, right? I said, yeah. He goes, listen, I'm 5 hours away from you. If you need me, I'm there. The only guy that ever reached out to me was somebody that had left the UPC 20 years prior.
And knew what we
And
faced.
they actually helped me to keep my ministry credentials. I'm hoping to be a chaplain at the VA. Someday I work at the VA now. What I'm doing right now is very ministry centric to veterans, because I was a homeless veteran for 2 years, those 2 years that I was there. So what's the benefit of having your identity stripped from you? Another thing I would like to encourage your listeners, my identity was a false identity.
Yeah.
My identity was who I was in the UPC, and I allowed that to define me. So I look back now and I'm thankful to God that I left, and I'm thankful for where we are today. I like the freedom. I like the liberties.
Yeah.
We still have restraint. I still believe in holiness, as it were. Right.
Yeah.
I love being able to have a beard. My first time. But before, you couldn't have that, bless God, you couldn't have that,
Well, they've adjusted that now. I see a lot of them with beards, and their wives still look like they've sitting back on the little house in the prairie behind them on these online services. I was scrolling through my news feed, and here's this guy with this massive beard and a pink shirt on,
Okay.
And I thought to myself, oh my word, those old patriarchs of the faith would roll over in their graves if they could see that big beard and that pink shirt, because I've heard sermons against both.
Well, so I guess they're still then about male freedom and female suppression. So
For
That
sure.
hasn't
Nobody's
changed.
letting go of that.
Hasn't changed.
Yeah, no. We got to give more freedom to the man, but women, sorry, go back to your box.
That's right. Well, I mean, it's whoever's in charge makes things easier for themselves and doesn't really care about how everybody else is being affected.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the mission field, Papua New Guinea. As a girl who has not been very far, that sounds very adventurous.
Mm-hmm.
And how did that come about and what was that like?
So when Esther met in Bible college, I was going to be a missionary. I was going to be the next Apostle Paul.
Right.
She had a missions passion since she was 8.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Bible college, not going to date, not going to get married. Met her over Christmas break. She used to have another friend, Esther, and they were passing notes. And for some reason, I became the middle guy, passing the note between this Esther and this Esther.
And she was my roommate.
Okay.
So we had 2 Esthers in the same room
So
in the dorms.
We got to talking one day, and I said, "What do you think about missions?" Now I'm fully expecting her to say, "I'm going to marry an evangelist," or "I'm going to marry this," and I'm like, "Well, good for you. That's not me." And she goes, "I want to be a missionary. I've had a passion since I was 8," and I read all the missionary books. The Freemans used to come to our church often in Washington State. And so we got to talking and had a relationship, started, and we got married in 7 months.
We met and married in 7 months because we both had that same passion for missions.
Yeah.
And I remember as an 8-year-old girl, I was raised in a pastor's home, a UPC pastor's home. My dad is still a licensed minister with the UPC. And he's 87 years old now. So of course he's no longer active really, but I was 8 and they used to subscribe to the National Geographic magazine. This was in the early 70s, like 1972, 73. And I'm sitting there as a little girl looking through these National Geographic magazines. And I remember coming upon an article, and I honestly don't know what country it was from, but this magazine had an article showing some black populous country. And I remember thinking, someday I'm going to be a missionary to these people. And I mean, that was it. That was just, that was what I was going to do. I had no interest in marrying an evangelist. I had, of course, when you're missionaries, you have to deputize and evangelize anyway, and you have to evangelize on the mission field. But, I was the adventurous, strong-willed little girl, always wanted to spread my wings and travel and explore and, yeah. I asked my mom one time when I was a teenager, because I was a pretty strong-willed girl, and I would climb the trees with my brother and help my dad in the garden, and we'd go rifle, shooting target practice, and I would beat my brother and in target practice, and he eventually said, "I'm not shooting with her anymore," And so I was kind of the tomboy of a UPC girl, had to wear skirts and, all the time, but I was the adventurous one. And I even asked my mom one time when I was older, I said, "How in the world did you raise me as a teenager and a little girl growing up? How did you raise me and still keep your sanity?" And she said, "On my knees, honey."
I was going to say lots of prayer.
Missions life was travel, and I'm fluent in 3 languages, and I can converse a little bit in the 4th. And cultures and languages have just been my love my whole life, all I can remember. And
It was a good fit.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why, even growing up in the UPC, I always had questions about why do they teach this, and why is this so important to them? Because I don't see it in the scriptures. And then you start traveling to other cultures, and you realize that the North American UPC church is vastly different than some of the other European or Pacific Islander or Asian UPC churches.
Okay, talk about that, because the implication here is that this is the right way of doing things. This is the only way of doing things, but that's not the case. Not even within their own ranks. When you get into other countries, it doesn't look the same as this.
Absolutely not.
Well, especially when it comes to, quote, what?
The standards.
Holiness issues.
Exactly.
Okay?
It's a cultural thing in North America. That's about it.
You know, my pastor wouldn't marry a couple if they didn't have wedding rings on. He was, like I said, they were very different. You know, then the whole anti-ring movement happened.
Yeah.
So I had to take my ring off to go on deputation, because if pastors saw me with the wedding band, they would have not supported our work in New Guinea on that basis alone. Okay?
That's crazy.
So you go to Australia or Europe, it's very significant to their culture for wedding bands.
You have to.
So, and the whole hair issue, you know, in Papua New Guinea, you know, they're not European-centric a culture. So their hair grows out. It doesn't grow long and down.
Mm-hmm.
It's all
So,
curly and
so
Yeah.
the whole grooming thing about that.
they don't have access to fine-tooth combs and soap and shampoos and lices and mites, hair, you know, skin mites and hair is just a huge issue. And in order to get rid of it, because they couldn't afford grooming products, the only thing they could do is shave their heads to get rid of the lice, because that makes people sick.
Right.
And so, I mean, we didn't even
Think about
stuff like that.
Here's a
as
good
missionaries.
example.
Yeah.
A great example. We had another AIM couple come to Papua New Guinea. They're kind of radical holiness at that time.
At that
right?
time.
You got to wear pantyhose. Women have to wear pantyhose. So they went to a church, bamboo church. Okay, you're going to get runs in your pantyhose, ladies. I'm sorry if you're sitting on a bamboo floor. Well, the Papua New Guineans were laughing. Now, this was her conviction. Okay.
Yeah.
And Papua New Guineans were laughing, and they were talking in pidgin, and she didn't know pidgin at the time. And this lady, I won't say her name, she said to Esther, "What are they saying?" She said, "They're wondering how come your legs are a different color than your face." Never wore pantyhose after that again.
That was the last time I ever saw her in a pair of pantyhose. You know,
so much for a God called.
The personal conviction went right out the window at that point, right?
It's beautiful though, because you have someone who's of that mentality because they come from North America.
Right.
And then they go to a different country and realize that God is so much bigger than that.
Yes.
And then when they get a taste of what God really does to the human being and how he loves the individual and how he is so unconcerned with some of these things that we think are a heaven and hell issue. Yeah. And they came back to the United States. They were only there for a short time, a few months. And they went back to the States, and he's pastoring a church now, but they're still UPC. But I tell you what, when they came back,
different people. They
were different people.
Better people.
Yeah.
Got her a wedding ring, beautiful, wedding diamond set. She hates wearing pantyhose. I mean, things it changed them. And I think if more people traveled, it's like you say, the saying is, one of my favorite sayings is, the world is a book. Yeah. And those who never travel read only one page, because it's just their little oikos, their little area that they know. And they don't know anything outside of their own
bubble.
Yeah.
Their own bubble.
Their own bubble. Good.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to stay closed-minded when you keep your world really small.
Very.
Right. Because all my friends agree with me. Well, how many friends do you have? I've got 2.
Yeah.
Right. So
2 friends who look like me, they have the same background as me, they have the same skin color, we have the same challenges, and so we think the same, so we must be right.
Isn't that the same thing happening culturally? People in group think mentalities, it's the same thing. And I wish more people would just be free to be themselves. Being yourself doesn't mean you have to leave God or leave spirituality or leave Christianity, but just be free and be you. Be the best you that you can be.
Yeah. Right. And don't you think that kind of at the core of it all is understanding grace. It's kind of like when you understand grace, you stop measuring everyone else because you realize none of us measure.
Right.
That's right.
Right. Well, grace becomes threatening to pastors that need control.
Yes, big
Okay.
time.
We never give people grace to make mistakes.
Yeah.
We never give people grace to fail,
Or
even though
react
God gives us
wrongly.
grace to fail, or grace to react wrongly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I think that that's probably the greatest revelation
Yeah.
that God wants to give to the churches, not just the UPC. And I know people use grace for licentious purposes as well. I get that, right? No rules, no guidance, no this or no that. Well, then you have nothing. You're just based on molasses. But grace just can't have. You can't have control in grace. There's no such thing as controlled grace. You know.
Right.
I think
and true grace doesn't produce a boatload of sin either.
Exactly.
No.
I told a pastor this. So grace is freely given, but it must be earned.
Yeah.
He got mad at me, right? Think about that. Grace is freely given, but it must be earned, right? That's not God's grace. That's if you want man-made favor, if you want favor of your pastor, this is what you've got to do to appease and please your pastor, but you're not really pleasing God in that effort. There's an innate hubris or arrogance that permeates, and that's why you get that smug arrogance, that condescending, I'm better than them because they do, X, Y, and Z. It's all a form of virtue signaling that, again, is another one of those things that are too common in our society, right? If I can shame you, then I'll feel better about me.
Right.
Well,
But then again, with grace, when grace comes into play, I'm not going to shame you because I know that you could shame me too. And I am flawed. And it's just when I realize it's just the mercy and grace of God that saves me and not my behavior, I'm less concerned with your behavior. I'm just over here trying to do my thing in my lane. And if you need some encouragement, I'm here. But, what do I have to say to you? I'm a mess too.
Right. And that puts us all on equal footing that we can love and encourage one another.
Yeah.
I just think with the God complex, the challenge with the UPCs, they want to fix everybody. I used to preach a message, if it's broken, don't fix it, right? Don't fix it. Why do you have to fight to fix everything?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Let people be broken. Let them be broken and give them grace and love and allow them to react wrongly because we're human.
Yeah.
We're going to react wrongly. When the whole world was spinning around us and we lost everything, there were times, and we both admit it, we reacted wrongly because we're human.
Exactly. But we got judged for it.
We got
criticized
for it.
How dare you react like that? How dare you question God?
Nobody gave us a break to react wrongly. They didn't have grace for us. When we did, they were sticking their nose in the air and shaking their fingers in our face, saying we shouldn't act that way or we shouldn't react that way. How dare we, And so I think the beauty of it now is, now that we're 7, 8 years out, done with it.
Yeah.
We've totally moved on to a whole different phase in our life. We have, I think, one thing that we have felt, I know for me personally, is just such peace. Because we don't have to worry about who we have to impress or who we have to please or what kind of performance do I have to do to make sure that I am acceptable to God.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about sinning. I'm just talking about just being me.
Yeah.
And being free. And really, one thing that really, I think, changed me particularly, this was probably the last year that we were pastoring in Wisconsin. And honestly, we weren't really happy with the UPC. Honestly, the higher you go up in the UPC, the more corruption you witness. And so we knew what was going on behind closed doors and in locked closets. Seriously. We knew a lot that most people that are just sitting in the pews don't really understand or know. Well, my brother had a conversation with me about a year, I think, before we left. And he had been out of the UPC already for about 10 years at the time. And we were just talking, and I was kind of telling him about some of the things that I was thinking about, questioning this and that. It's like, why do we, even when we began to pastor the church in Wisconsin, I asked my husband, Brian, what do I do if the ladies come up to me and ask me, you know, XYZ in the Bible? What do I tell them? And he said, look, if it's not in the scriptures, just tell them to do it. I mean, if the Bible doesn't say anything about it, we're not going to teach it. And we did. And they thought, oh my God, we'd gone charismatic, you know.
Charismatic. Nothing worse.
Right.
I know, because we didn't teach it like the former everybody else taught it. We gave them freedom to live for God, you know, and make their own judgments. But anyway, so my brother and I were sitting down and having this conversation, and he said, you know, Esther, all of your life, and even as pastors and missionaries, your job is to recruit people to your group, not to develop yourself in your relationship with Christ, but to win as many people as you can. You know, if you don't win one, you're going to hell. We can't go to heaven empty-handed. We got to fill our basket and take it to heaven. Show Jesus our basket, you know, of people and souls that we've won. And that's been the whole focus of the UPC is get, bring our numbers in, make the numbers bigger.
Well, they're building a kingdom.
Build the kingdom, yeah. But he said, when was the last time that you erased all of those preconceived notions and everything that you've been taught and even that you might believe is true?
Mm-hmm.
Take all of that and wipe it with a clean slate. We witness to somebody, we teach them Bible studies, we expect them to come into the church and change overnight. Get rid of their pants, you know, quit cutting their hair, shave off that mustache. He had to when he first came in, you know, he had a mustache. So, you know, conform, look like us, and you'll be saved. How often do we expect people that don't know anything to come in and radically change immediately? And he said, that's what you've been doing. But what about if the shoe were on the other foot? You and I, he told me, he said, we were raised in this thing from the time we were in mom's womb.
Mm-hmm.
And we were taught one thing, and it was the XYZ and ABCs. And we didn't dare deviate from that. But what if you just ignored everything you were ever taught about the scriptures and about God, and you just start reading the Bible as someone who had never been raised in the church and had never been you know, at the feet of a learned pastor all your life. And so Brian and I started doing that probably about a year actually before we stopped pastoring. We'd sit down with our devotions and our daughter, and we'd all sit there and we would start reading the scriptures from a blank slate. Oh my goodness, Deanna, you talk about opening our eyes to the way God really sees the human heart and the way he really sees the individual and how much he really loves us and the reason he came to die on the cross, why he did this and that. Acts 2:38 is such it's like a flimsy film covering the deep oceans of what God has for the human being and how much he loves us. And it was quite the eye-opener. And I mean, we were gone out of the UPC like a year after that.
And I never had a pastoral theology that was conducive to being a UPC pastor.
No.
My pastoral theology just did not. I wasn't the head under shepherd of the Lord himself. Therefore, I was going to control and manipulate people. I was there to lovingly guide and give people the help they needed to go further down the road. They didn't have to get my approval to go on vacation. I would like to know, only because I worry about them. So they actually took the fact that I wasn't controlling them as a sign that I don't love them.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, what am I to do? You know, so my pastoral theology just wasn't conducive to
what they were used
to a top-down, control-centered dynamic. It never was who I was, and I couldn't compromise who I was to fit some other pre-described mold. That was a bridge too far for me. You know, I'm
Yeah,
not.
and what they were used to was somebody trying to do the work of the Holy Spirit in their lives.
Right.
And that's why pastors burn out, and that's why saints get abused, because there's boundaries being crossed there.
And if they have the ironic thing is if they would reformat their thinking, they would allow the Holy Spirit to work fully in their lives. But their religious paradigm, it prevents that. God then becomes the justifier of what I want. He's my Jesus clause. You know, if he gives me what I want, then he's a good God. And that's something that I had to wrestle with when I left. When everything was going my way, God was an amazing God. But then my image of him greatly diminished when things weren't going my way.
Right.
My perception of him. Right. So that's how I had to come to the understanding that, you know, God is God no matter the good or the bad. Just because there's bad in a person's life does not mean that's the devil.
No.
And that does not mean that God is the mighty smiter who has decided to persecute his beloved children.
Right.
It just means that we're human beings. We're prone to the roller coasters of life that everybody in Christ or out of Christ are prone to.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that encouraged me was the story of John the Baptist when he was having his second thoughts in prison. He said to his disciples, you know, are you that should come, or do I look for another?
Right.
The Lord told John, go tell John that all these amazing things are happening. The lame walk, the blind see, the poor have the gospel preach them, and blessed are those that aren't offended in me. See, Jesus didn't say, oh no, John's called for me, let's do prison break, right? Get him out of there.
Yeah.
John died a horrible death.
Yeah.
Did it mean he was any less beloved of God? See,
No.
I don't think that those views of God are
Healthy. They're not healthy.
People get ashamed to go through difficulty, which is why pastors struggle. They die on the inside. That's why there's, you know how many pastor suicides are happening across the country right now? You know how many UPC pastors have committed suicide the last 10 years? It's a lot.
I've heard of a few, and UPC pastors' wives as well.
Right.
Known some.
But the thing is, nope, it's the other skeleton in the closet, that the elephant in the room, I should say, that nobody can talk about. Why is that? It's not because of their lack of faith or whatever, their despondence. Sometimes they feel like, oh crap, I've been sold a bill of goods. It's not true.
And they feel stuck.
And because they've lost that, then to them nothing is true. Now, I went through a season where I felt that way.
Yeah.
Honest truth. And I would have well-meaning people say, Brian, you better not get bitter. Brother, you better not get bitter. And I wanted to say, pardon the language, screw you. I'm bitter right now.
Yeah, and you have every right to be bitter.
He does.
And I had a biblical right. Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. Call me bitter, because the Lord has dealt harshly with me.
Yeah.
And they would want to give me a lecture again, trying to fix me, right?
Yeah.
Well, I learned a lot about bitterness. Bitterness is a dark season, but it's a season that is part of the healing process.
Yeah.
I'm thankful that we were able to process the hurt and the deep moral injury that was inflicted upon us. And bitterness helped us to process that in a way that we could come out and become better, right? So why minimize bitterness? I don't celebrate it, but people feel that way, right? I mean, it's a emotion.
Yeah, anyone who leaves, that's their first accusation. Oh, you're bitter. You know, they're just bitter, which of course means they're flawed human. Don't listen to anything they have to say. They're not floating in the clouds. So obviously they can't be trusted.
Right. It's God-given emotion. That's the whole thing about not only the positive emotions, but the negative emotions that human beings feel. They're God-given.
Yes.
God's an emotional being himself. So when they discount that, they're basically discounting God, in my view. Yes.
Yeah. I also wanted to say along that line too, is that a lot of times, if you study the grieving process of someone who's lost a loved one or had a traumatic event in their life, they go through these stages of grieving.
Right.
And a lot of times when someone is grieving and they get to that anger stage, at first they're extremely hurt, like, whoa, what just happened? I can't believe, Then they get to start thinking about it, and then they get angry.
Yeah.
That anger sometimes comes across to other people as bitterness.
Yes.
It's not. It's part of the grieving process. You'll get over it. It's a season.
Yeah.
Yeah, some people kind of stay in there a little bit longer, and if they don't get out of that grieving process, that stage of anger, it can ruin them.
Yes.
But when someone's grieving, like we were grieving.
Of course.
The
Yeah.
loss of everything. We were shunned. Our friends that we thought were friends. We went through that grieving process, and we were hurt, desperately hurt. And then we became very angry that it happened because it was so unjustified. We knew it. And that's when they were like, you better watch your attitude. Don't you get bitter, Brother Henry,
No compassion in that at all, is there?
No.
None. But it's not, a lot of times what we consider bitterness is not bitterness. It's the stage of anger in the grieving process. And I think that's why we really need to give people grace to react wrongly to a situation.
Yeah.
Because they may be going through that stage of grief for something that happened to them, and we don't know their story.
And I find you learn a lot in those dark periods too.
Yes.
You learn a lot about yourself, and you learn a lot about God.
Yeah, very much so.
Here's a pro psychology tip. For all those that are inclined to say when someone's angry or bitter, to try to give them a quick lecture, you better not do that, you better not do that. That is psychologically not healthy.
No.
So
Yeah,
it's not going to help anything.
Don't tell me what to do. I mean, that's the worst time in a person's
You are
life
not-
that you can tell them.
You are not going to help anybody.
No, exactly.
Or even a patronizing, condescending, oh, I'm so sorry that you feel that way. A passive aggressive. They're good at that too. The pseudo psychologists, pastors that like to manipulate and control pseudo spirituality that way. They can use great passive aggressive terms to try to sound like they're caring, but they mean the opposite of it, or at least it comes across that way.
There's guilt built into their sympathy, and they put that on you.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, you guys were pastoring a church. You had trouble made because somebody had their eye on that church for their son-in-law, who was
a pastor, who was the superintendent. Yeah. Who lived in our city and still associated with the saints of the church that we were pastoring.
So everything about that's just a recipe for disaster, isn't it?
Yeah, it was.
And so you decide, so you're out for 2 years, you're living with Esther's parents, going through a really rough time, a time when all these friends you thought you had would have came in really handy.
Right.
Yeah.
But they were all MIA.
Yeah.
And, that's a common thing. The love of God only extends so far.
I even tried to get the Iowa superintendent to say, I want reconciliation with the superintendent that had wronged me so greatly in Wisconsin. They wouldn't get with me. They would not even extend to me a courtesy of let's get together and resolve. Because, the biblical principle of reconciliation.
Right.
Right.
No, they didn't want any of it.
Right. So none of that. And of course, because he's a superintendent, I can't bring it to the quote church like Matthew 25 says and have him kicked out. He can disobey Matthew 25, but he can use that against people that he wants to oust. So we even made efforts with the Iowa superintendent and the Wisconsin and David Bernard himself. This needs to be made right.
Yeah.
Got nothing for you. Sorry, got nothing for you. We were told to sit under a pastor for a year to learn what it's like to become a God-called man.
And to learn servant leadership. Yeah.
Okay.
So we did that.
I did.
Oh, you actually did that.
I moved to Iowa and I went to a UPC church for a year.
UPC church for a year.
He was a worthless deadbeat baby boomer pastor. I was actually in church more than he was.
On vacation and gallivanting.
And I was teaching and I was involved, but I told him, I showed him everything that had gone on, right? And he was thinking, hey, the Henrys can help me grow this church. So what happened was I told him once, I was dealing with every time I went to church, I had anxiety, fight or flight, PTSD.
Yep.
PTSD from a church.
Yeah.
Think about that.
That's more common than you think, Brian. I hate to say it, but with the being involved in the spiritual abuse groups and stuff,
Yep.
it would shock you how many people cannot sit through a service without getting short of breath and panicked and sweating and thinking, I've got to get out of here. I can't handle this.
I had that. And then I once told, I told the pastor that I was singing, I gotta go. I think I'm done.
Yeah.
Well, he mistook that like I'm done. Like, so he stopped using me. I enjoyed teaching. It's what I did. It feeds me, right? It's good,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So he stopped using me. And I had a couple Wednesday nights where I was just a mess. The idea of going to church was just, it was too painful.
Yeah.
At the end of my year, I'm with her dad, and all of a sudden, he's like, well, let's go to the pastor's house for a minute. Okay, what's going on? Well, I walked into another ambush. I just had one a year prior. And he said, well, Brian, listen, I know that your year is up, but I just want you to know that I don't think that you've been very faithful. I lost it. I started cussing out him. I started cussing him out her dad.
His father, my dad.
Right?
For
I
taking
said,
him over there and ambushing him.
Get
They
me
just
the
told him
hell
ambush
out of
him.
this house now.
Yeah.
You are pathetic. I've been to this church more than you are, and you're the deadbeat, worthless pastor. You take 5 weeks in Hawaii, and all of a sudden I'm the one that's not faithful. I let him have it, right? So I went home right then and I wrote my letter. I gave them the year, but notice what the rules are. No matter what you do, it's never enough.
So that the weekend that year was up, he wrote the letter and turned in his credentials. But we did. We sat under a pastor for a year like they asked us to.
And I was more faithful to church than that pastor was, even in spite of my PTSD. I told people in the UPC they would have been better, they would have been kinder to me if they would have murdered me physically.
That's how we felt at the time. Yeah. So anyway, we started, the next week we started going to my brother's church, the one that he goes to.
Yeah.
In town there. And
Pastor Dan.
What an incredible healing that was.
He was a charismatic pastor, loved God.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. The first thing I said to you when we walked into that church and sat through the first couple services, I said, Ryan, this is actually a healthy church.
Yeah.
We felt the church was healthy. And we began to heal. And we went to that church for a year. And
and that's when we moved, yeah.
And that's when we ended up getting an opportunity to move to Texas.
But the funny thing is,
because he still wasn't working.
The funny thing is, with that pastor, I had a good talk with him. Because I go to the church and I'm having flashbacks.
Yeah.
Songs would give me flashbacks. Songs would put me in a place where, because the things that we were trying to do, they were doing it. It was great. But I just never had the chance to do it in Wisconsin because I was a UPC pastor. And there was days that I couldn't go to church. No judgment, no anything. No. Hey, Brian, good to see you. Hey, Brian, listen, we're going to have a board meeting over at the house. Do you want to kind of help? We'd love to have your input. So they'd actually involve me and get my input on different programs and church things they were doing. And that was the year that I would say our healing really began until we moved to Texas. And that was kind of a relapse because there was a former UPC pastor, emphasis on former UPC pastor, that basically was a charismatic UPC because its pastoral theology was
very UPC.
So then all my anxieties began to heighten again. Another abuse cycle. He was a control freak. I'd started a school. I worked at GameStop. But one time I had an anxiety attack at that church so bad that I said, Esther, I'm going to go out to the car. And I got out to the car. I waited a couple seconds. I have to get the hell out of here. I started the car and I went home.
He left me.
And
we drove together. We had one car.
And I was like, we had one car. And the only car we didn't lose at the time. And I'm like, well, Rainey and Rhonda can help her. She'll figure it out. I got to get out of here.
A couple friends of ours gave me a ride home.
She was upset, but
I was honestly pretty pissed off at him.
I had to get out of there. And now I was
I
having
understand
panic.
now, yeah.
And I had another friend, Rain and Rhonda, that we sat with. And I sit right next to them. I said, listen, if I run, help me out.
Grab me, don't let me leave.
I literally formed a support group in that church, right? The pastor didn't know crap about anything about helping. He was wanting me to start his Bible college. And I kept telling Esther, once he gets that Bible college started, we're out. You watch.
Sure and enough. 6 months later, the Bible college was, it was an accredited satellite of Life Christian University out of Tampa, Florida.
I got my master's degree in divinity from there.
From there. And 6 months after the school started, it was blowing and going. And sure enough, he was ousted. And then we stopped going to church altogether. We were in Texas for 2 years under that pastor.
We visited churches, but it just too much. Again, for those that need church, I'm a fan of that for people's what they need. If it helps a person out internally, as long as they're free to be them.
Yeah.
But for us, we just saw so many systems of control. We visited so many different churches. Now, ironically, I got a pastor friend that cuts our grass. We talk a lot. I visited churches here.
He's a very kind
man. I'm not opposed to it. When I got my VA chaplain endorsement from the largest endorser of VA chaplains in the country, they asked me, do you go to church? I said, no, I don't, but here's why. You know what? They got it. They're like, yeah, we understand. Totally. We're there too.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think a faith family can be helpful.
They gave him, he has all of his chaplaincy endorsements for the hospitals, for first responders, for hospice, for the Veterans Administration, for the only thing he doesn't have a chaplaincy endorsement for is
active military
because he's a veteran, but he's not active anymore. So
okay, yeah.
But he's, they gave him his chaplaincy endorsements and they ordained him with their organization under the chaplaincy umbrella.
The UPC helped launch me on a new purpose and a quest on spiritual injury. The term is called pneumotraumatology, the study of spiritual injury.
Yeah.
Soul injury.
Yeah.
Okay. So I still want to get some more classes in clinical pastoral education because clinical education is a lot different than pastoral education.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. The clinical side of it is different. Right. But if it had not been for the UPC, I would not have gone into my journey because it turned out that our own healing journey has now given us tools that can help other people on that journey.
Yeah.
Whatever stage they may be from it. If they're still, from an early outie to I'm still a trapped innie. Right. Yeah. Right. So whatever stage, or I've been out for a long time, still working through stuff. Cause you know what, I'll have days too. This last year I've had less, than ever. So I'm thankful for that. So, but again, I'd say we're still on the journey. I think we're much better off than we've ever been. And I'm excited about the future.
Everything we're much.
She has a husband she can handle better because I'm not. I was really going through an emotional roller coaster.
It's rough. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard on the whole family unit, when one person is so wounded.
Yeah.
All of my coping skills were removed from me. There's a book called Lost Connections by Johann Hari.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about 9 lost connections. In Texas, I had lost every single one of those 9 connections.
Yeah.
So, I had a disconnection from God because my connection to God was, what am I doing for him today?
Right.
So
now all of a sudden he's not there.
It feels like it. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So that lost connection with God was there in our perspective, from our perspective. He was always there. Oh my goodness. We look back and we see how much he was
hindsight,
and we're so thankful he was there.
Yeah. And I learned a life.
From our perspective, he was nowhere to be found.
Yeah. I learned a life lesson. Just because God's silent does not mean he's not speaking. Right.
Yeah.
So, but again, it was a season and it was a journey, but it led me on the path, with what I'm currently doing. Right now I'm helping veterans with their their care, their clinics and stuff like that. I love the VA that I'm a part of. I love the work that I'm doing. Every day I get to help a veteran. So every day is a good day. I'm a veteran myself. And I think they're, some of America's treasures. Mm-hmm. So it's fulfilling to get up every day. Every day I feel like I'm doing something actively to help somebody.
And, also one of the lost connections that Johann Hari talks about in his book, Lost Connections, it deals with, one of them is the lost connection to nature. People that are cooped up in their homes all the time, that don't get out, don't have the sun is so good for a person, that connection to nature, just the ability to de-stress and enjoy the smells and the sights and the sounds of running water and beautiful trees. And, we had lost, the connection to God, the connection to our church spiritual family,
to meaningful work,
financial
stability.
Oh my goodness. There's 9 of these lost connections that he talks about in this book. We had them, all 9 of them. And one of them was a connection to nature and
connection to others.
We weren't going to church anywhere. We were living in the deserts of West Texas. It was 110 degrees every day for, 4, 5, 6 weeks on end with no let up. There was no rain. I couldn't grow anything. We had nothing. We were just working, grinding, trying to make a paycheck, trying to pay our bills, but there was absolutely no meaning to life in West Texas once we left. And so he was looking for a job in either Eastern Kentucky or Eastern Tennessee or somewhere in West Virginia or, this beautiful Appalachian Blue Ridge Mountains area, because we have lost so long that connection to nature.
When we had in New Guinea.
When we lived, oh my goodness, we lived in the middle of the mountains in Papua New Guinea, and we missed just getting dirty.
Every day is a PNG reminder for us.
The mud always wins.
Yeah.
It was just raw nature. We were living off the land.
Rainy season all the time.
Yeah, it was breathtakingly gorgeous, living in the highlands and the jungles of Papua New Guinea. And then we moved to Norway, which is a gorgeous European country with those big mountains. And I would take walks in 6-foot snows that, of course, they carve a path out. And every evening in the winter, I'd go walking, or we'd go hiking up in the woods and pick wild blueberries. And we always had that connection to nature until we lost everything and we became cloistered and isolated. And we lost all of our connections to everything. But we really missed that connection with nature because we hated living in the desert. It was not fertile.
Or healthy.
It was not, yeah. And we lived in an old house and our air conditioner would go on the blink and it was 110 degrees outside. And they wouldn't be able to fix it for a week and a half to 2 weeks. We'd be sweltering in our 90-something degree house with no wind and no air. It was horrible. We hated living in the desert. We were in a bad place.
I remember one day I got home, was at work, and this whole ball started rolling. And I was walking down this windy hill into the office where I worked in Texas. And I had this just thought, I want to live by water. I want a creek on our property. And we were kind of house hunting phase, but hard to find houses in West Virginia that have like a 2-car garage with, oftentimes they'll make that an extra room. So you park outside. We wanted a 2-car pull-in garage, and we wanted, I wanted to be by a creek. I had this weird thought. So I got home from work that day and I said, honey, I want to be by a creek. I need to hear water running. I want to be able to walk to a creek. Can you look for, is there any, she said, Brian, she was almost in tears. I just saw this house today and we looked at it. I'm like, okay, well, talk to the realtor. So The next day, the realtor looked at the house. They said, yeah, it's a good price, good house, close to your work. And we made an offer on the house 2 days later. And then this is the house that we actually moved here.
Sight unseen.
Sight unseen in a city that we've never been to. We never went to this town on deputation either.
Never been here before, but we had a house.
But sight unseen in a city that we've never been to.
Our friends and family thought we were nuts.
We got here on May 23rd at midnight.
Last year.
Slept on the floor.
We did. We slept on an air mattress on the floor.
And then the next day, we closed on this very same house.
And then 3 days later, the moving van got here with all of our stuff.
And then I started work a day after that.
Yeah. It was a whirlwind, but it happened just boom, 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 all in a week.
And then I gotten 2 promotions since then.
Yeah, he has. He's been promoted twice.
And now I'm doing something that's directly connected to what I feel like my callings are, my passions are, my interests are. Helping veterans out. I love it. And, I love the VA here. I love what we're doing.
Yeah. And so we again have the connection. Oh, we have some dear neighbors, dear friends. People just go out of their way to welcome us and help us, and we help them. And it's give and take. They come and till our garden for us, and we can goods for them, and they let us borrow their ladder, and they come and mow our lawn without even us asking, or they notice the grass is a little tall. Sure, you know, they've got 3 lawnmowers out here on our 3 acres mowing our lawn. It's just one of those beautiful cultural things. And we have a huge creek in the backyard. One of the main, sometimes it becomes a roaring river, and you open the door and you can just hear the roar of the creek, you know, right there. Of course, we have to have flood insurance, you know, because we do live so close to the creek, but we're nestled in the mountains about 5 miles outside of the city limits in the country. Yeah. And we have 3 acres. I have a big garden. We've got apple trees and pear trees and cherry trees and wild raspberries that grow everywhere. It's paradise.
I just love the feeling, you know, connection to our neighbors, connection to God, connection to nature, connection to others, connection to meaningful work. So it's kind of come full cycle.
And it took 8 years, but we feel like we've finally come on the other side of this, where we can, now it's almost excitement, like, okay, God, what do you have next?
Do you feel like a lot of the connections you lost were replaced with connections that were of better quality? Like that, were so much better of a fit?
Yes.
So here's the reality is, it's a beautiful question.
It is.
I think about all of our missionary friends. I've got one of them that I still consider a dear friend. They're the former missionaries to Papua New Guinea, the ones that founded the work there. Love them, the Carvers, beautiful family. Outside of them, all the other missionary connections, people that we thought we had connected on a meaningful way, life calling, purpose, passion, all that stuff, they were all meaningless connections. So for those that may be thinking about leaving, or those that have recently left that are wondering about those connections, how meaningful are they? Where will they be if you need them? Where will they be for you if you need them?
Well, if you already know that your relationship's precarious based on whether you stay or leave, I think you kind of probably already have that answer.
Right. So then the hard reality is to have an honest discussion with oneself about, do I really need this connection? Because it's hard. I mean, I won't lie. When we were canceled, you know, we were the pre-cancel culture, you know, Christians.
Pioneered it.
Right. Well, I'm sure it's happened long before us, but we know what it feels like.
Nothing new under the sun.
We decided too that we would sever connections that weren't beneficial to our well-being.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
We purposely just, you know, there were people that wanted to keep in touch with us only because they wanted to find out what we were doing and what was going on in us, and see if they could catch us, or, look at that. See, I told you that would happen, you know.
Yeah.
Those kind of people, we drew our boundaries and stuck to them, and we've never been happy.
I would say for us, for every probably 100, 200, 500 meaningless connections that we lost, we've gained several meaningful ones.
Right.
Really meaningful.
And I would rather have yourself very much included in this.
That's true.
I would rather have a handful of life significant, meaningful connections than a bunch of worthless connections. I mean, if I want worthless connections, I'll join Twitter, right?
Yeah.
But I don't.
You know, it's nice to have it's nice to have people in your life who really truly want the best for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true. They
Yeah.
don't have any hidden agendas. They're just
No,
people.
nothing to gain. They want the best.
Yeah.
Right.
And we want the best for them, and we treat each other accordingly and with respect,
Yeah.
without the control. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, it's just wow.
So those that might be thinking
It's so
about,
good on the other side. It is so
and
good.
those that might be thinking about just leaving, again, my heart, my sympathy. I was forced out because I wouldn't have left on my own, so I get it. You know.
Yes.
But to brave that, I feel like I've left an organization that I would call, sorry to say, a cult. I was in it for 25 years, ordained many
and I
years.
was in it for 45.
By the way, I was ordained by N.A. Urshan himself at headquarters. So, head agree, woo, right? But again, by leaving that organization, I was able to actually become a part of the church.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I don't,
Beautiful
you know,
people.
so,
Such beautiful people.
and I mean the church in the very broadest biblical
Yep.
center,
The
you know,
biblical, yeah.
of the church.
The body of Christ.
And
Body of Christ.
that's
It's
the
so big.
community of believers
Yes.
that I really want to journey with.
Yep.
On this
So big.
journey through life.
Where's your faith now? And you know, you guys already mentioned how you're doing, you know, you guys are doing really well with your jobs, and you love what you're doing, and you have this beautiful new home, and you know, friends, and you know, it's all come full circle, but better.
Yeah.
Spiritually, how has that changed, and where are things at? Because people always want to know, because that's another thing, you know, well, if you leave the UPC, you're going to lose out with God and all this stuff. So where are things there?
I think my relationship with him has deepened
Yeah.
on a very personal level, because I no longer have to perform. And it's changed my life.
Yeah.
My faith, I think, is very strong. And when things don't work out, we've come up with a saying just in the last couple of years, and it's come from our heart. It's like, well, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, stuff happens, and if it's going to happen, it's going to happen, and there's nothing we can do about it. Why get depressed and angry over something we can't control anyway?
Yeah. We don't try to force things.
And we don't try to force things anymore. It's like, if it happens, it's going to happen, and it may not be pleasant, but we have each other, and we have God to lean on, and he doesn't always do things the way we want him to, that's for sure. But I think my faith today is pretty strong. It's not faith in a religion. It's not faith in attending a church building. Of course, now with COVID-19, nobody's attending a church building here in this area anyway. And I think it's actually been good.
I do too.
Because we've been doing that. You've been doing that for 13 years.
I have, yes.
Distancing yourself from going to a church building. And I think it's really causing people to get down to where God really meets the human spirit, is at the grassroots, in the deep of the heart, when they're isolated and they have to it's just them and God. And I think the church needs that. And they're learning how to do it. And I think it's good for the church to have this thing happen. And we've been going through it. We haven't been a member of a church now for 4 or 5 years. We haven't gone to his church.
When we
visited,
left,
but that's about it.
When we left that church in Big Spring in Texas, when that pastor, we knew he was going to do his thing, and he did his thing. It was the most liberating thing for me. I finally felt like, this is awesome. I finally felt like I was free,
like a burden,
from the trap
lifted off of our
of
shoulders.
corporate
Christianity.
Corporate Christianity, and that's the phrase right there, isn't it?
Yep.
Exactly.
So I think my faith is strong now, and I don't need to go to a church building and be there every time the doors are open and wear myself out and stress myself out with my schedule. it's just me and God, and that's how it is.
On my journey out, I did go through a deep season of true, real anger. For a while, I wanted to sue the church that did that to me. But then I read First Corinthians chapter 11, when your brother does you wrong, would you not rather suffer the wrong? And that made me furious.
No, I wouldn't rather suffer.
I want them to suffer, not me. So I had to be confronted with scriptures that made me want to question, do I even want to be a Christian anymore?
Right.
Right. And then I thought, well, I'll just be the reverse Apostle Paul and just persecute the crap out of these idiot Christians. Okay, I wanted to. I just wanted all of them to suffer like I was suffering, right? But then I realized that's just an overinflated view of self and all that. But, it took me a while to kind of process it happened. What's the greater? Because at the time, I couldn't see a greater purpose. I wish I had worried a lot less about what the future looked like and just lived the moment and just embraced the moment. And it probably would have expedited my recovery, would have reduced my PTS. But this whole idea of fighting and controlling, we're taught that in the UPC. If you're a minister or pastor, you got to fight and control. If you don't, then you're not a leader. It's a flawed leadership teaching. So, but once I finally just gave up the fight, gave up control, that's when things began to happen positively. And I can look now, and for the first time in a long time, I can see hope and dreams for the future. Now, again, I'm not stressed out. We're not going to worry about whatever. Do our best for today. If it happens, great. If it doesn't,
we tried.
It's all good,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think one thing I love about Esther's faith, and I've always loved about her as a person, she's the steady Eddie, and I'm the emotional roller coaster. Right? So, and she's just always been that rock and that stability. But I think that when she says her faith is deepened, I'd say for both of us, it's just become more genuine.
Yeah. It's no longer
real.
Performed or put on to impress anybody else or to conform or do what was expected of us. We don't have anybody expecting anything from us right now. And oh my goodness, you talk about the weight of a burden lifted.
Well, our dog's expecting to be fed, and our cat's.
She's over there playing with her.
That's the only expectations we manage right now. I'll go to work tomorrow at 8:00 in the morning.
My garden needs tending, and we go out.
But that's simplified life.
We
makes
just
for a
live
fulfilling
so
life.
Simply and just enjoy God's blessings on our life. And it's not because we're anything special, but we are special to God.
Yes.
And so many times we put people on a pedestal, and sometimes we put ourselves on a pedestal thinking we're all that. Brian and I know Jack Squat very well.
He's my good friend.
Yes. We know diddly squat. And
that's the beginning of wisdom.
It is. And there's no expectations. There's no pressure. There's just relationship.
Yes.
And it's so beautiful and so freeing, no pressure. I don't have to perform for anybody,
It's peaceful.
Yeah.
It's so peaceful. I don't think we've ever felt such peace. When we left, we started going to a counselor.
Right away.
Because of everything we had been through and what he was dealing with, these night terrors or these panic attacks and anger. And, we started going to a counselor, and we went to a counselor for 2 years probably before, actually, when we moved here, we stopped going because our counselor was in Texas. Right. And it was the best thing that we did after leaving was going to see a counselor and processing all the emotions and the horrible things that we were facing and feeling. And it really helped to heal us. Leaving the UPC, because it is a cult, I'm just going to say it like it is. I believe it is. My family's in it, and I hate to say that, but it's true. There's so much control and so many mind games and so many, mind games is what it is, just that control, that when you leave, you're left wondering and reeling, and if you can go to see a counselor and let them help you process the loss that you're going to feel.
Esther, would you mind sharing the good advice that your dad gave you? That I really liked that.
Yeah. When just shortly that year that we were, quote, sitting under a pastor right after we'd lost the church and everything else, we were wanting to shout it from the mountaintops of how these people had wronged us and how horrible they were and how dare they. And we just wanted to tell the whole world what nasty spirits they had. And, we were just wanting to go after them. And my dad said something to us that really helped. And he said, if you just keep your mouth shut. We were like, but they wronged us. No, if you just keep your mouth shut, there's going to, and you deal with it in your own way, process it quietly, there's going to come a time that other people are going to come to you and ask you what happened. They're going to come to you and want to find out your story, and then you can tell them. And back then, we didn't want to believe it. Our emotions were high. They were raging.
Yes.
But
here we are, 8 years later. Thank you.
Here we are. Deanna's asking us our story.
And here you are in a healthy place.
Yeah, that makes all the difference.
It's one thing to hear about someone's pain and you can sympathize, but when you hear of someone's pain and then see how they've overcome, it's such a blessing. And so I just really want to thank you guys for being willing to share. I know it's not easy rehashing some of this stuff, and I just think it'll be a blessing to a lot of people.
And if it can help one person, it's all worth it. So,
totally.
So we get the journey, we understand the journey.
It's a journey.
Our heart and thoughts and prayers are with everybody, with whatever stage they are that may see this on their journey.
Yes.
So, we're here with you and for you too. Anything we can do.
Yeah. Once you leave, you start a journey, and just enjoy the journey. Let it happen.
Let it happen. And I would just remind that if there's anyone watching and you are struggling right now and you could use some support and resources, feel free to reach out to me and I can point you in the right direction. And so thank you, Brian and Esther. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit like. And if you would like to subscribe to my channel, YouTube will notify you whenever I post a new video. So thanks for watching.